So it was suggested in your bio, but tell everyone the title of your book.
The title of the book is The Lucky Ones.
So good. So good. So who is your reader? Who are the lucky ones?
It's for the lucky ones. Really, it's for anyone who has struggled with the weight of grief and survivor's guilt in particular, and is looking to share or lighten that burden as they process and accept trauma or loss.
Can we just have a round of applause for the authors and how their clarity and how they so succinctly share who their reader is, so we can all know we need these things. Amazing. Tell us your core message.
The core message is that the acceptance stage of grief is not a hole to fill. It's just a dark spot that needs a little light.
Oh, that I have not heard that version. Say it one more time.
The acceptance stage of grief is not a hole to fill. It's just a dark spot that needs a little light.
Oh my gosh. Dang it. That's a keeper.
Thanks.
You know, Francesca's another example of someone in workshop who has just been searching, writing, searching, accepting the creative process, pivoting where she needs to pivot, following her heart, pulling back, going forward. So to hear that core message now is kind of emotional about that. I really need I really need an email with that core message in it so I can remember that. Tell us what your promise is to your readers.
My promise to my readers is that by the time you finish this book, you will know that wherever you are in your stages of grief, you are not alone and you are able to get through it.
Love, a simple and powerful promise. So I want you to set up the excerpt. I do want to give the title because you sent it to me. The title of this, and keep in mind, this is a different book. Francesca's writing essays, creative nonfiction, so in a little different style. The title of this is Finches, Felines, and Faith. So why don't you want to, you know what? I don't think this needs setup.
I agree.
I don't think we need it.
I don't think so. I hope not.
So everybody, Finches, Felines, and Faith. Take it away, Francesca.
All right. My mom's intrinsic connection with nature and joy working in her garden, mixed with her grief, turned into seeing Emily in natural signs. Anytime she saw a goldfinch, bright yellow, Emily's favorite color, she'd say, "Oh, Emily's saying hi." She would interrupt any conversation we were having, whether on the phone or in my parents' kitchen, to point out a visit from a flighty, feathered Emily. I wanted to believe, but I couldn't. I'd look at the visitor and think, or it's just a bird that's been around before and knows where to get food. I understood why religion and God and higher powers worked for so many, and I was envious that I couldn't even fake my way in. It felt like the country club of grief. I didn't qualify to be a member, but so desperately wanted what they had. There was no discernible religious or mystic reason Emily died, and understanding our loss as part of the plan didn't work for me. When looking in from the outside was too heartbreaking and infuriating, I sought text that would validate my own beliefs. I read about how humans are conditioned to make meaning out of nothing and create patterns where there's randomness. I stayed close to the cold comfort of the arbitrariness of life. Then my older sister, Sarah, started noticing finches, and my dad. Sooner or later, Emily was visiting everyone. She was a social butterfly as a goldfinch. She showed up in different yards, different days, and different times. My lack of finches started to feel personal. After weeks of nothing from any feathered friend outside of the fat, red-breasted robin that bore a strong resemblance to President Taft, I snapped. While visiting my parents, my mom made a cheery comment about her latest Emily sighting, and I shot back with my faithless question, "Why haven't I seen any fucking finches?" Her answer was to buy me a bird feeder and finch food. I waited and watched from my kitchen. Nothing. Days of it, weeks, then months, then seasons. Mold got to the finch food before Emily did. While yellow birds of my twin spirit were scarce, I was presented with a different critter of the animal kingdom. It was my first day back at the office in a post-Emily world. When I arrived at the one-story, single-family, home-like real estate office, my uncle, Emily's godfather, and one of the two broker owners of the business was already there. He threw his thumb casually over his shoulder and asked with his signature grin that lets you know you're about to hear something really wonderful. Do you want to see some kittens? Outside, I knelt in the grass next to the shed that housed for sale signs, riders, and lawn equipment intended to shape what was wild and natural into a more curated beauty. The two kittens that had been born, lived, and ultimately abandoned under the shed by our parking lot came out immediately. One was solid gray, the other a gray tabby, both with eyes wide that hadn't yet found their permanent color, and tiny voices that wound their way into my heart as they purred and climbed on me. We bonded, collectively saved for the day at least. With an ark of animals already at home, the twosome would be too much to bring permanently into our house. But I couldn't leave them. I owed something to these lives. It was my fastest real estate deal to date, from houseless to homed in less than 4 hours. My mom's friend Karen said she could take them. Karen and I agreed that she would collect them the next day, so I scooped them up and took them home for the night. Briefly ours. Nick and I took Sherlock and Molly, names as temporary as their residency with us, to the bedroom I used as my office. I set up a litter box, food, water, and toys our older cat had long lost interest in. We played and pet and cooed over the kittens, noting how their personalities started to shine as they got more comfortable. I buried kisses into the top of Sherlock's little gray head as he napped contentedly on my lap. The following day, Karen came by after work to pick them up. I turned them over to their permanent futures and filled her in on all I learned in the hours we spent together. Karen thanked me and made sure to get the kittens settled safely in the car and drove off waving and promising to send me updates on how they're doing. Then they were gone. I didn't even make it inside the house. Collapsing into the Adirondack chairs on our porch, my whole body heaved as I sobbed uncontrollably. No amount of knowing the future, understanding it was for the best, or trusting that things would be all right brought me comfort. My head has sucker punched my heart. Later that same week, a third kitten showed up. I let one of our dogs out to our backyard and saw an unfamiliar tuft of black fur parading back and forth on the far side of our shared fence, rubbing herself on the edges of the wooden slats. I bent down and saw a perfect, tiny little tuxedo kitten doing her best to squeeze herself through the gaps of the fence, though she was only able to fit a reaching paw through. She reached for me as I called to her. There were more kittens, even stray cats that never made it to being adopted, but that Nick and I fed or put together shelters for in the winter. I attributed the ubiquity of felines to living in a city, across the street from a park, and people not listening to Bob Barker's advice at the close of every Price is Right episode to spade and neuter our pets. Chalking it up to coincidence was easy, until I found one in the grocery store. I walked down the aisle in front of the checkout lines, and there was this little thing balled up, just lying there. People either didn't see it or sidestepped it. I got closer and realized it was a calico kitten in the middle of the floor of the Acme. It made no sense. With one hand, I held the items I had come to the store for. With the other, I scooped her up, my head on a swivel for signs of how she got there and anyone looking for her. Nothing. She started purring. There were other kittens, they kept coming, but no goldfinches. Technically, I saw a yellow bird once. As we bumped along the road in her Wrangler one afternoon, I told my friend Lisa about the bird visits and the significance they had for my family. I casually mentioned how I never see any, reassuring her that I didn't really believe they were Emily anyway, and wasn't it kind of funny when you think about it that I would be the one left out? She gave me a firm, reassuring, "It'll happen." I scoffed at the generic nature of the response. I thought she knew better than to try to placate me with empty optimism. Unfazed by my obvious disdain, she doubled down and guaranteed that Emily was just saving it all up and she was going to send me a really big bird. I turned to face out the window and filed her comment under confirmation that nobody understood what I meant. I didn't need to see a bird. I needed to see Emily. People who barely knew Emily would just find her in the wind or the clouds or some random bit of luck that's so unconnected it could almost be insulting. So why couldn't I? I was supposed to be the closest. Our connection was the most special, yet I couldn't attract or connect with her spirit. The fault had to be mine. The Natural History Museum, which caters to young kids on field trips or with ambitious parents that fill their time with educational hands-on experiences, was coming up on the right. Their sign changed based on their featured exhibit. As we passed it, this exhibit, for some reason, featured Sesame Street's Big Bird, a show Emily watched endlessly growing up. Lisa hadn't seen him, so I had to make a choice, to believe or not. I deferred the decision. "Ha," I said. "What?" Lisa asked. "You didn't see? That's funny. The sign? The museum sign? What about it? It had Big Bird on it from Sesame Street." She made a triumphant "I told you so" U-turn. She wanted documentation for my future skepticism, proof that the biggest, yellowest bird showed up for me. I had pouted about wanting a sign, about not seeing a bird, and still, I stubbornly rolled my eyes, even as I came face to face with a literal sign of a big bird. I smiled for the picture, not quite believing, but no longer excluded. I smiled because, if nothing else, it was all a little absurd, and that I could believe. I never got another bird. I got a lot of kittens. Living in a city where strays are all too common from feral cats and domestic indoor-outdoor cats mingling unsupervised, it made logical sense. But I started to look at what didn't make sense or didn't require it, at least. They showed up when I was with family. They showed up when I was in Emily's favorite grocery store. They showed up in my own backyard more than once. They showed up for me to protect, for me to keep, for me to let go. They showed up needing something from me, which was exactly what I needed. They showed up helpless, but still determined to develop their independence. They showed up 2 at a time at the same time the first time. They showed up for me and got others to do the same. It was maybe a few months ago, I finally took down the finch feeder for good. More than 6 years and no finches for me. But I got kittens. The distractions that came at the right time and in the most random places. And I can even sometimes think I got Emily.
Ooh, applause, Francesca. I love that story so much.
Thank you.
There's so much love for you in the chat. I hope you'll get a chance to look at that. I want to hear a little bit about what changes you hope to see in the world as a result of your book.
I hope that people who are struggling to really articulate and understand and process their grief, even in the late stages of it, and without any of the conventional wisdom feeling applicable, can find something in what I share. because that's what I struggled with the most, so that they can feel seen, and from that they can start putting more light in their lives, in their dark spots, and hopefully bring light to others in their darkness.
So beautiful. And we've got to do this again. Do you or anyone, do you know yourself that you need this book, or do you know someone who needs this book? Please raise your hand. It's a lot of pre-orders, Francesca.
Thank you.
What's been surprising about your author journey?
It's surprising that it's taken this long for me to try this, and also it's surprising me that I'm doing it at the same time. It's it's hard, as the other authors know all too well. And what surprises me is that the hardness and the easiness is so they're both equally constant. And so wrestling with those and having to navigate the waters of writing through it or taking a break from it, and not feeling like it's an all or nothing zero sum kind of game. That I think you said it best, AJ, when I was frustrated with myself about taking a break and then coming back, and he said, you're just finding your process. And I was like, oh, I get to have a process? Wait, I get to determine a process for me? So I think discovering those things has really been the most surprising part.
I'm so thrilled that you've stuck with it. And I just need to share on a personal note. Sometimes authors come into workshop with this idea for a book that's, really important, and it makes practical sense, and it can be monetized. And but there's this other story that you really want to tell, and you think, let me get this book done, and then I'll do the book that's on my heart.
Yeah.
And you kept trying to do this other book, and you flipped it, core message, 2, possibly 3 times.
Yeah.
And then you finally said, okay, I surrender. Let me write this book on my heart. And
Yeah.
watching that journey and seeing how you've stuck with it, it really doesn't matter if you need to pause. What matters is that you come back. And look at this beauty you've created from coming back and dedicating yourself to this book on your heart. And I hope that you will please see the wonderful responses you're getting. I also want to, so the status of your book is you're writing it. That is the status.
Yes.
And people can follow you on Instagram. Is there any other way is that the best way for people to hear updates about the Lucky Ones?
For sure, because I'm going to be building a separate Instagram that's just about the Lucky Ones. I started to do it when it was a different core message, so I've got to revamp that one, and I'll be sharing that on there. You can find me on Facebook as well. Pretty much social media and email is the best way to reach me, for sure.
Amazing. And I'm so honored that you shared that with us. I want to close just by, and I'll give you a chance to say what you might want to say to your people who showed up tonight.
Oh my gosh, I'm so floored by everyone who showed up. Thank you. It means a lot, because all day, anybody I talked to, I said, I don't know if I'm more terrified that nobody's going to show up or that people will show up. Because reading your writing out loud is just one of the best, worst things you can do to yourself. So but ultimately, as it got closer, I was like, it means a lot that people want to be here for this. It makes it worth it. So thank you.